Welcome, everyone. My name is Scott Phillips, and I'm the Executive Director of Passages. It's great to be with everybody again today here. It's our honor today to host Ambassador Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Oren most recently served as a member of Knesset and deputy minister in the Prime Minister's office. Prior to that, for nearly 5 years, Oren served as Israel's ambassador to the United States. A graduate of Princeton and Columbia, Dr. Oren was a visiting professor at Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown. He holds 4 honorary doctorates and was awarded the Statesman of the Year Medal by the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the Dr. Martin Luther King Legacy Prize for International Service. His last 3 books, 6 Days of War, Power, Faith, and Fantasy, and Ally, my journal Across the American-Israel Divide, were all New York Times bestsellers. From New Jersey, Michael Oren made Aliyah in the 1970s. In the Israeli Defense Forces, he served as a lone soldier in the paratroopers and as an IDF spokesman. Ambassador Oren is the father of 3 and grandfather of 5 and lives in Jaffa in Israel. In a moment, Ambassador Oren will share some thoughts he prepared for us, and then we'll be able to ask some questions before opening it up for our audience to ask some questions. So make sure if you have questions, send those to us in the Q&A box there at the bottom of your screen. If you're a Passages alumni and like to participate in the live chat, you can do that on the Passages Leaders Network platform. Ambassador, it's great to be with you. The floor is yours.
What an honor to be with you, Scott, and with all of you out there. Thank you for that very warm introduction, very flattering introduction, especially remembering that I come from New Jersey. That always touches me deeply. One thing that's not often known in my resume or cited in my resume is the fact that nearly 30 years ago, it's a long time ago, I served in the Israeli government of Yitzhak Rabin, and I was his advisor on interfaith relations. I was the liaison between the state of Israel and many, many dozens of churches, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, evangelical churches throughout this country. I know every church in this country, and I came to that position from an interesting sort of background. I grew up in a small town in New Jersey. I was the only Jewish kid in my neighborhood. And at a very early age, about 15, 16, I decided that I was fascinated by the period of the Second Temple. And I was looking for any source. And that brought me to the door of the local Baptist church, where I knocked on the door, and Pastor Miller came to the door, great guy, cool guy. And I said to Pastor Miller, I got to learn the New Testament with you. Can you teach me the New Testament? You can't proselytize me, okay? I'm not interested in converting, but I really want to learn the New Testament. Every week we sat down and we read the New Testament. I discovered something extraordinary there. I started a book that was an overwhelmingly Jewish book from the first century, from the period of the Second Temple. And I discovered a figure of Jesus of Nazareth, which was extraordinary for me because he spoke my language. When he said, he called God Eli, my father, or Abba, my father, which my kids call me Abba. Or when he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, why would you forsake me? That I can understand that language. And even the Lord's Prayer, you read it and it comes right out of the Hebrew. Avi asher b'shamayim, kadosh shemcha, hallowed be thy name. So it spoke very deeply to me. One of my favorite passages from the New Testament is from 1 Corinthians. From Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where he talks about the difficulty of seeing clearly. And he has this wonderful line where he talks about how people tend to view reality through a glass darkly. And if you know anything about Roman glass, it wasn't clear like the glass we have today. It was very smoky. And if you look through a Roman window, you didn't see the outside so clearly. And so Paul was talking about the difficulty of seeing reality. And as I grew up and got involved in Israeli foreign affairs and statecraft, I came to value, I think, put the premium value on those statesmen, those officials who could see clearly, who could see even through the dark glass and see the reality. And I think that is one of the great challenges we face in the state of Israel, particularly in these days when there's so much darkness and so much confusion and so much misinformation about this country, to actually see Israel for what it is, for the country that represents our values, the country that's willing to defend both democracy and tradition, the past and the future, that is carving out that through technologically, but preserving and uncovering its past. What other country in the world is doing this to this degree today, to see through that dark glass and to see the reality. And that is why I've been so drawn to Passages from its very inception. It gives young people a chance to come to this country and to see it for what it is, to see the realities, to see a country that is not just surviving, but thriving in a very hostile environment, as you know, a country that is very much like your country, like the United States of America, very recognizable. Young people here are very much like American kids. And yet, we are cast in a profoundly different reality, a very complex reality. And seeing it up close, seeing it firsthand, there's really no substitute for it. A visit to Israel is always transformative, especially if you've never been here. It's always transformative. It is spiritually profound, but it is also illuminating. You see through the glass, and that's what Passage is about, and that is why I have been honored to be associated with your extraordinary organization from the very beginning. So thank you, Scott.
Yes, absolutely.
Over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and we are honored that you have been involved and you've been on a lot of our programming, speaker on the ground in Israel multiple times. Most recently at a big event we had in Jerusalem in the winter before COVID-19 hit, and it was a beautiful.
That previous life, yes, I remember.
It feels like ages ago, but it was
Yeah.
a former life, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was a great evening. Over 500 young people together, looking out over the old city of Jerusalem, and your remarks were incredibly inspiring. So we're grateful for your involvement and your willingness to engage with the next generation of Christian leaders.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, so on that note about, sort of the similarities between Americans and Israelis, what are the shared values at the base of the American and Israeli identities? What's the shared values that we hold as countries, as people?
I think it begins with democratic values. And this, people often pay lip service. They talk about the shared democratic values between Israel and the United States. I served in the Knesset. And I will tell you that Israel is not only democratic, it's flagrantly democratic. That there are discussions that happen in the Knesset that we have in the Knesset that would never be held in the Congress. And we in that Knesset, we have people who don't salute the Israeli flag, Jews and Arabs who won't sing the national anthem, won't sing the Tikva. We scream and yell at each other. If the seats weren't screwed down, they'd probably throw seats at one another. At the end of the day, we all sit down and have coffee, and we're civil to one another. Israeli democracy passes about 4,000 pieces of legislation every year. It's the world leader in the passage of legislation. That shows you here in this immensely diverse and often complex and conflicted country, we're able to get people reach across not one aisle but multiple aisles. And we share these values. We are the only country, maybe in the world, certainly in the Middle East, that has a memorial to John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It has a memorial to Martin Luther King. It has a memorial to 9/11. Those of you who haven't seen it outside Jerusalem, it's a very moving memorial. We have not one but two replicas of the Liberty Bell with the birds from Leviticus inscribed on it. May freedom ring throughout the land. That commonality of democratic values is very, very real. But beyond that, it's the freedoms. It's the freedoms of speech. It's the freedoms of assembly. It is our willingness to defend those freedoms. I'm not sure there are many countries in the world where people are actually willing to go out and defend those freedoms today. Very rare, unfortunately, very rare. And they're not to be taken for granted at all. Very serious.
Absolutely. So there are similarities. There's a lot of things.
And great rock music, by the way, Ron. Fabulous. Oh, yeah. Best.
Yes, absolutely. So we're alike in a lot of ways, and sometimes there are differences, and you got to experience some of those differences being the ambassador to the United States from Israel. And there's this term daylight that was used a lot and can still sometimes be used. Why is daylight such an important term in American-Israeli relations, and what are some of those challenges and implications of daylight between us?
Well, daylight is actually the challenge. The idea that there should be no daylight between Israel and the United States. And these were principles that were certainly in place starting in the 1980s with President Reagan. They can be traced back to President Truman as well. And what is that? We're going to have differences. We are two sovereign countries. Our reality is different in many ways than your reality. Start with the beginning, the fact that you have two very large oceans on either side of you, and pretty nice neighbors to the north and south. We do not.
A little different.
A little different. And we are tiny and embattled, and you are very large and not. And so we're going to have differences, but we should not show, we should keep those differences between us in closed rooms. We shouldn't let our enemies, or our common enemies, those who refer to the United States as the great and Satan and Israel as the little Satan, they're right. We're not Satan, but it's big and that we are together. We shouldn't let them enjoy public displays of disagreement between us. And the United States will have a separate, independent Middle Eastern policy, as it should. But it's important that the formulators of those policies discuss the policies with us before they're made public. And that's what we mean by daylight. And it's respecting one another's sovereignty, but understanding that the alliance between Israel and the United States is essential not only for Israeli security, for American security. I believe it's essential for the stability of the world.
Yeah, so you're saying that there may be differences, obviously, as two different countries, but that they should be handled in a way that's that friends would handle a situation.
I don't want to get political here, but during the period when I served in Washington, many things that principle of daylight was not particularly upheld, and I think that the Middle East and America's position in the world suffered because of it. I think in many ways the Israeli-American relationship is a barometer. People look at it around the world, and they judge Americans' constancy and dependency as an ally by the way it treats the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Maybe if you could delve into the idea of mutual support a little more. How do you believe that Americans and Israelis should demonstrate mutual support when national interests may be at odds?
Well, I would start, first of all, by respecting Israeli democracy. When Israelis go to the polls, they're voting in many ways on an existential basis. This is the government that's going to save my kids. And it's not just a political preference. It is very deep and personal, these elections, and respect the outcome of Israeli democracy, even if you don't like the people get elected. Because I think that democracy is one of our great achievements, could be our greatest achievement, and maintaining this democratic system. Try to understand one another's reality. That was the biggest task that I faced as ambassador to this day, because our realities can be, again, looking through that glass darkly and understanding that America may have a different perspective as a superpower than a small power like Israel might have, or that Israel, conversely, a country in the Middle East, is not a country in the North American continent. Understanding all the ramifications of those differences, just as we appreciate the commonalities between us.
Mm-hmm. I just want to remind everyone, we got a few more questions here that I have for the ambassador, but I just want to remind everyone to make sure you get in there and ask your questions in the chat at the bottom of your screen. We want to make sure we get to your questions and toward the end here. So just make sure you do that. Ambassador, in your book, you describe the agonizing decision to renounce US citizenship because you made the choice to dedicate yourself to serving Israel. What, in your mind, made Israel important enough to take that step?
Well, I grew up in a period in the aftermath of World War II. You can't see the photographs on the wall of pictures of my father fighting in Europe in World War II. He and his brother liberated concentration camps. They took pictures of those concentration camps. My father used to show them to me when I used to get beat up by some of the anti-Semites in my neighborhood. He'd say, "You see those pictures? That's why we need a strong Israel," he would say to me. Had a big impression. I grew up during the period of the Six-Day War. People forget that for a month in 1967, we all thought Israel was going to be destroyed, that we were going to live through a second Holocaust in one generation. And that didn't happen. We woke up on the sixth day, the seventh day, to a miracle. And that changed also. That was a strong sense. The fact that it's hard to imagine today that there were 3 million Jews who were kept as prisoners behind the Soviet bloc. And so this notion that the Jews in the world could be free was completely alien to us, that there would be tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews who couldn't get out of Ethiopia. It's inconceivable today, but that was the reality in which I grew up. Mm-hmm. I very early on reached a conclusion that to not move to Israel would be to miss the most exciting event in Jewish history, perhaps since the end of the Babylonian exile. Or maybe the Hanukkah. It was really to miss that. I was not going to stay in New Jersey. I don't want to he might be New Jersey, but I was not going to stay in New Jersey and miss this. And what can I say? It was the best decision I ever
Yeah, yeah, and you've done a lot of good. You've done a lot of things since you made Aliyah. It's been quite a journey for you.
made. Not always easy. A couple of wars, a
Yes.
couple of intifadas, which were the hardest. Second, I
Mm.
think the hardest was the second intifada. But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
and Israel has proven to be a land of opportunity. I mean,
Mm.
I came here with a backpack. I came here with nothing but was on my back. So you could build a life. You could find yourself being in the leadership of the country just by getting off a plane. Pretty amazing.
Mhm. Mm.
And I've witnessed, God, I've witnessed miracles. I'm witnessing again tens and tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews being repatriated. I've witnessed the Aliyah, immigration of nearly 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union. Nothing like it. The equivalent of something like 50 million new Americans coming in within 1 year. And they transformed the country. These were nothing short of miracles. I've seen Israel move from being sort of a poor backwater country. There were no restaurants here.
Mm.
When I moved here, there was no television. You couldn't make a phone call to the United States. And we are now listed as one of by all criteria, one of the 10 most powerful countries.
Yeah.
And we are forging the 21st century technologically, and this country is thriving.
Yeah, I've been going to Israel for 15 years now, and just even 15 in that 15 years, a lot has changed and progressed.
It's extraordinary.
Very first time that I went there, and 15 years ago, obviously was not as far back as when you came. And there, people didn't have cell phones, but it's come a long way. I mean, ease of movement, ease of life has definitely changed over the past 15 years in
And
Israel.
entirely too much good food. But along with it, with
Yes.
modernization, we have then also acquired some modern problems. An income gap that we didn't have, a social gap between rich and poor, between people living outside of the major cities, people in the middle of cities, and many experiences that Americans know also. They would not be alien to you. And we still have not, we still haven't achieved full security. We haven't achieved peace. I've been involved in those efforts now for well over a quarter of a century. I'm always optimistic. You can't look at Jewish history, you can't look at Israeli history without being optimistic, but it's a challenge.
Indeed, indeed, and the fact that Israel is a raucous democracy, Israel is having these conversations and trying to find solutions to the best it can, for sure. What advice do you have for young leaders looking for something equally significant to dedicate themselves to? You went to Israel, you packed up, you made Aliyah to Israel, you made something amazing out of your life, you've had tremendous success. What is some advice that you'd have for some of our young leaders listening today?
From the book of Joshua, be of good strength and courage. Chazak v'ematz. And Chazak v'ematz is if you know what your passion is, if you know what your beliefs are, then follow them and fight for them. I can't tell how many people I meet, God, who are maybe billionaires, really. People who have a lot of money, and they'll always confide in me. They'll take me aside and say, "Gee, if only I'd done with my life what you've done with yours." I think that the greatest fulfillment you can have is by identifying those beliefs and working hard for them, even making sacrifices. This doesn't mean you shouldn't go out and make $1 billion, but if you can. But
we need those people too. Yeah,
we need those people too, certainly. But
yeah,
the greatest fulfillment you're going to have, is identifying those causes and going out and fighting. It's I'm as passionate about this place as I was when I was 15. And it's by the way, and I've seen it, warts and all. Okay, I've seen it all, ups and downs, ins and outs, because that passion was so deep and so authentic. And sometimes even when I go up against in audiences where there are hostile questions or demonstrations, most recently in American campuses, and I'll always be able to say to my adversaries, I listen to you, I hear you, but how much were you actually willing to go out and sacrifice what you say you believe in? Were you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's great advice. I love that scripture in Joshua. Be strong and of good courage. And I think
Be
that's
strong with courage. Exactement.
so important. It's so important.
Mhm.
Um, get out there, pay your price, work hard, and go after it. Go after it hard, and trust in God for His favor and strength, and just go work hard. I love that. Well, we can we've got some questions from some of our audience here, so we'll just delve right into those here. The first question is, how has criticism of the Jewish state and its perception evolved over the course of the last several decades?
Oh boy, that's a great question. See this gray hair? It's all from that. If I grew up, Israel was the good guy. We could do no wrong. 6 Day War. We were David, and the other side was Goliath. And then somewhere in the 1970s, it began to switch.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, nobody had ever heard of the Palestinians before 1973, 74. They were referred to as the Arabs of Palestine, not as Palestinians. If you're referring to Palestinians, you're usually referring to a Palestinian Jew who lived in Palestine before the creation of Israel in 1948.
Mm-hmm.
So the emergence of the Palestinian issue, they became, for the most part, the Davids. We became the Goliaths. And it was part of a general thrust of media in the West to be very critical about the West, and Israel was perceived as part of the West. And so, in the same way that that media would be to criticize, say, the American government, they would criticize our government, and tremendous amount, a tremendous amount of, on one hand, fascination with this country, where every major news outlet in the world had a bureau here. And Israel was reported on more frequently than China and Russia, sometimes together. And along with that, an almost unfathomed depth of ignorance about Israel. People would say things about Israel without knowing a word of Hebrew, without knowing a word of Arabic, without knowing the history, and just rush to all sorts of conclusions. So that is what transpired over the last couple of decades. Israel could always do a much, much better job of explaining itself. Our big problem here, Scott, is that among young people in particular, there's a sense that no matter what we do, these people on the other side are going to hate us. And there's anti-Semitism involved. And it's something I've taken upon myself to try to explain to young Israelis, no, we can't give up. Even if we can only convince 20% on the other side, we should keep this. We should keep doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Another question comes from the audience here. Despite maintaining a wide set of Western values, Israelis have a mindset that prizes being more direct than many Americans do. Did culture, to put it,
you don't know.
I bet you were sort of going back and forth. You were in Israel, trying to be a bridge to sort of the American government and so forth. I'm sure you felt like Gumby sometimes.
Well, I tell you, Israeli political culture has not changed. Yes, it's very direct. I was in that book, in the Ally book, I draw a comparison between the photographs of the president and the vice president that appear on all public buildings, specifically going to the embassy. And American leaders are always smiling and they're showing a lot of white teeth. But Israeli leaders, when they take a picture,
very stern.
They are looking at the camera and sort of scowling.
Yes.
And now I see these pictures of Benny Gantz around him, who I know quite well. He's also scowling into the camera because Israelis don't want to see white teeth. They want to see serious people are going to stand up to adversaries. Yes, and it's difficult for Americans from their culture, which is much more refined culture. It has all sorts of layers of civility than Israelis. But Israelis have a hard time with Americans. They feel that they're not being frank with them. And I think the difference is, and I say this, I tread lightly here, the difference is, unfortunately, have become less. That the civility that I knew in American political culture when I grew up has largely disappeared. And it's unfortunate. There was a time when, certainly even when I went to Washington in 2009, when Republicans and Democrats would still play basketball together, still play cards together, they certainly pray together. And it's much less of that.
Much less that way. Did those cultural nuances ever pose a challenge as the ambassador, and how did you navigate that? The challenges of direct, sort of the Israeli directness, and then, the differences in the way Americans handle things.
All the time.
Yeah.
I get hundreds of examples. And where on one hand, American leaders would come out of a meeting, even with the prime minister, and sort of almost be offended by his frankness and directness. And Israeli leaders would come out of a meeting with American leaders and understand things completely differently because first of all, the English language has many more nuances than Hebrew does. I knew some ministers who prefer negotiating in Hebrew, even though they knew English quite well, because Hebrew doesn't have those nuances. It's right to the point, and that caused a lot of tension sometimes. When people come out of meetings and have completely different understandings because the meetings were held in English.
Absolutely, I'm sure there were many stories of that happening. And with your background, you definitely had the right kind of background to be able to bridge the two countries and try at least.
I like to think so. Israelis have to learn that there's not one America, there's many Americas.
Yeah.
And you have to speak to each of those Americas in their own voice. Can I tell you a quick story if you have a chance?
Please, absolutely.
A couple of years ago, I think I told this story when you were in Jerusalem, Scott, so forgive me for repeating it. And that is that, in Israel, in our political culture, you can never talk about weakness. You can never talk about fears. You can never talk about difficulties you had in life. You can never cry. Okay. And whereas in American political culture, a leader who shows emotion talks about the difficulties he had in life, it gets respect. And one thing, strangely enough, you can never talk about in Israeli politics is your faith in God. You know this? Strangest thing. You have a lot of people who are religious, very religious, but you can never talk about faith. Whereas in America, if you don't talk about faith, you're considered, I don't know, something wrong with you. I've taken delegations of Israeli leaders to Washington, some of them quite religious, and they're astonished by the way Americans talk about faith. And so I was in the country, in the United States a couple of years ago. I was giving speeches to synagogues on the high holidays. And I talked about being a kid who had a lot of difficulties growing up. I was dyslexic, I had learning disability, and then I talked about my faith. And I managed to give this speech. It's really a sermon at one synagogue. It was wonderfully received. Then I got a note at the next synagogue saying that Shimon Peres, the president of Israel, had died, and I had to run back to Israel. So on the way to the airport, I sat and I actually gave this sermon. I photographed. I had it filmed, and I had it sent to the other synagogues I couldn't attend. And this film found its way online in Israel. And in Israel, because I talked about my faith in God, I was branded, how should I say, a madman? My political career almost ended there because I was talking to an American audience. And if you talk to an American audience, Jewish or Christian, doesn't matter. And you don't talk about yourself. You don't talk about your difficulties in life. You don't talk about your connection with your faith. You'll lose the audience. I'm going to talk about, what I did in war and how I, threw the grenades. It doesn't work. But here there was a real deep difference about it.
Why do you think that is in Israel? Why do you think it's, I can answer why in America we do, but why do you think in Israel that's sort of a taboo thing?
Because faith here is much more of a private affair.
Okay.
Observance is a public affair. Faith is very private. Whereas America, going back to Tocqueville at the beginning of the 19th century, talked about how Americans are very expressive in their faith. And that religion plays a very important role in America. The American Revolution, and like the French Revolution, which was a revolution from religion. American Revolution was a religion, was a revolution for the freedom of religion, and very different. And so religion plays a different role in American life.
Absolutely. Thank you. The next question from the audience here is, how does the multifaceted, diverse nature of American Jewry impact American-Israeli relations?
More gray hair. Again, there's not, as I said, there's not one America, but there's many Americans. There's not one American Jewish community. There are many American Jewish communities.
That's right.
And they run the gamut from very Reform, Reconstructionist, to conservative, to Orthodox, to very Orthodox. And then as ambassador, I was ambassador to all of them because the connection between American Jewry and Israel is not only a moral imperative for the state of Israel, it's also a strategic interest in the state of Israel. There's roughly, I think there's over 30 Jewish members of Congress and the Senate. There's a quorum and minyan in the Senate. More than 10 members of the Senate are Jewish, and America's aid to Israel, standing up for Israel in the UN and other international courts, is strategic Israel. So this was very crucial for me, but it wasn't always easy. Among the more liberal branches of Judaism in the United States, among the younger members of those branches, tremendous criticism of Israel, feeling alienation from Israel, particularly around the Palestinian issue, but also among the ultra-Orthodox. I was the first Israeli ambassador to meet with the leadership of ultra-Orthodox, what's called Haredi Jews, who will not salute the Israeli flag. They will not sing the national anthem because they believe that a Jewish state created without the intervention of God, of the Messiah, is heretical. Now, that's an extreme example, but actually, you think about it, I was the first person to actually have a conversation with these people. And so you have the challenges on the liberal left, if you will. You would have challenges on the ultra-Orthodox conservative right, if you will, if those terms are even applicable to Jews in the Jewish community. It needs constant care, understanding, and openness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. On that note, Yosef from the audience here asks, how do you think Israeli political decisions impact support of Israel among American youth? And how do we ensure continuous support of Israel among young people in America?
That's a terrific question. It's not an easy answer. Israeli politicians will probably take into consideration the impact of the decisions on America generally, on American youth, perhaps liberal youth to a lesser extent, but it will be there. But at the end of the day, their priorities, of course, are Israeli political imperatives and our security needs. We're facing an issue right now over the question of possible annexation, parts of the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. I personally don't use the word annexation because I don't think the Jewish people can annex its own homeland. But there are many warnings about the political ramifications for an annexation, not only among Arab neighbors or some of our Sunni friends, but particularly among Americans of the liberal persuasion. And so all I can do is that when Israeli leaders make these decisions, is to bring it to their attention that there may be a political price to pay for this. And at the end of the day, for all of the changes sweeping across America, looking forward, there's no alternative to the United States as Israel's ultimate ally. As I believe there's no alternative to the United States for Israel as America's ultimate ally, and to be more cognizant and sensitive to the impact of our decisions on important segments of the American public.
Mm-hmm. Another question from the audience here comes from, her name's Eliana. Eliana asks, what might Jewish or Israeli people define as the greatest misunderstanding that American Christians may have about them?
American Christians have a misunderstanding about Israelis or Jews, or let me understand the question.
Yeah, how might Jewish or Israeli people define as the greatest misunderstanding that American Christians might have about them as Jews?
About them, I could say misunderstandings among Israelis about American Christians as well.
Maybe answer both. I think it's an interesting discussion.
I think the biggest misunderstanding that some Israelis might have about American Christians is that we are part of a messianic program that will end up with our conversion. That messianic Christians, particularly evangelical Christians in the United States, are not interested in Jews remaining Jews, the Jewish state remaining Jewish, and that's a total misconception. And I have to fight against it all the time here. It's not widespread, but it's there. The biggest misconception that the American Christians would have about Israelis, first of all, that we're not people of faith, whereas according to all the polls, Israel is probably the most religiously observant and respectful of tradition country in the modernized world. Somewhere around 80% of Israelis would define themselves as traditionalists in some way, if not religious. It's very high percentage, and that percentage goes up all the time. And maybe some American Christians would cast doubt on our commitment to peace. And I cannot emphasize this more emphatically, that having lived the way we've lived, having served and fought in wars, have my kids served and fought in wars, having known so many people who have suffered such a we want peace desperately, but we don't want a peace that is going to endanger our lives. It's going to bring more war. And every time we have withdrawn from territory, certainly for the Palestinians in recent years, in Lebanon in the year 2000, it has not given us peace. It's given us tens of thousands of rockets. And this is the direst threat that Israel faces. So, you may say, why don't you just make sacrifices for peace? You make sacrifices for peace. You want 10,000 rockets on your border? Start withdrawing.
Yes, absolutely. Not cut and dry, black or white. It's
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, in that way. So a question we have here asks, how did the Arab Spring change the nature of American-Israeli relations?
I think it changed because I think Americans began to realize, certainly decision makers began to realize what we had been telling them for not years but decades. And that is that the Israeli-Palestinian or the Israeli-Arab conflict is not the core conflict of the Middle East. That yes, Arab leaders may say that if you solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, everything in the Middle East would be okay. It turns out that millions of Arabs in this region cared about other things far more than they cared about the Palestinian issue. And I think that what has transpired in the years since the Arab Spring, since 2011, with the closing of relationships between Israel and Gulf countries, even Saudi Arabia, is indicative of the fact that people are tired of the Palestinian issue in this area of the world. They'd like to see Israel move forward, like to have an open relationship with us, to wed Israeli technology with Arab resources, which could be transformative for the entire world, to stand together in a united front against Iran, which would be hugely beneficial. And I think that certainly Arab leaders, maybe parts of the Arab public as well, have looked back over history, going back to the 1930s, and have realized that the Palestinians hold the world record for turning down offers of an independent state. Amazing. Again and again and again, they've walked away from the table. And I think they're fed up. Enough of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. We have a question here from our good friend, Bishop Plummer. He said in the past, yes, absolutely. He says in the past, thank you, Bishop Plummer, for being with us today. It's an honor to have you on the. Bishop says, in the past, racial protests in America affected Ethiopian Israeli youth and contributed to protests in Israel by Ethiopian youth. How are the protests throughout the U.S. affecting Ethiopians in Israel and Israelis in general right now?
Well, first of all, it is a great honor for me, for my dear friend Bishop Plummer, to be with us this evening. Thank you. If you would have asked me 5-6 years ago if Israel had a racial problem, I would have said no. That Ethiopian Jews were airlifted here. Israel was the only largely Caucasian country in the world that airlifted an entire African population at great risk and expense. And I would have thought, yeah, the Ethiopian Jews have had difficulties here, but it's not racial based. And I turned out I was wrong. All of a sudden, I woke up in the morning, there were protests. They closed the major highway near here. And yes, there are problems in racism in Israel, and we have to surmount them. I think that the record has improved immensely. We still have a way to go. And perhaps for that reason, I have no evidence to adduce for this, that maybe that is one of the reasons why there hasn't been that type of response to what has transpired in the United States in recent years. That we have made some improvements. And by the way, some of the similar claims were made in this country about police brutality toward Ethiopians. You should know, but they were addressed quickly. The only attempt at what we call intersectionality has been by Arab radicals in this country to say, "Well, we are like what's going on in American cities," but it's not the case.
So, thank you for that. along the same lines, and this will be our last question here.
Later.
Along the same lines, Becca in our audience says identity politics have become an issue in the United States, and this is the same sort of conversation, but maybe we could delve a little deeper. What role do identity politics play in Israel? Maybe you can go into the Ethiopian, topic a little bit more and what.
I'll give you an example from something that happened yesterday in my hometown in Jaffa. Now, I live in a town that is actually in many ways an example of coexistence between Arabs and Jews. We shop at Arab stores; they're our neighbors. But there have been demonstrations over the last 2 nights with the police, by the way, including some rather harsh confrontation between police and Palestinian Arabs living in Jaffa. And the issue has been around an effort by the city to build a shelter for homeless people. Get a load of this stuff. And when they were digging the foundations of this home for sheltered people, they came across bones. And that happens quite frequently in this country. It's been around for 4,000 years. Everywhere you dig, there's going to be something. And Arab Palestinian Muslim radicals, some of them affiliated with the Hamas movement, have claimed that these bones belong to a Muslim cemetery, and that the municipality of Tel Aviv was desecrating the cemetery. And this led to often violent demonstrations, not entirely, but most of them were peaceful. And they've been ongoing. I don't know what the solution is. It's always a problem with the bones. But what's interesting, and this goes to Becca's question, is that the people who came out in support of the radical Muslim Hamas-affiliated movement were the ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties in Knesset.
Interesting.
Why? Because, and this I learned as being an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin, that in Judaism we regard human remains as holy. And it doesn't matter if they're Jewish remains or non-Jewish remains. You have Christians remains in this country that are holy as well. Human beings are holy, and the ultra-Orthodox have often protested, sometimes violently, against construction programs or projects that have dug up bones. And so if you want to talk about intersectionality with a twist on it, here it is. This is Israeli, identity politics. Moving here, it can cut different ways here than it does in the United States. But certainly, identity. We are a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-racial country. By the way, I opened up by talking about seeing through a glass darkly. One of the revelations that you'll have coming to the state for the first time is you expect to see one type of people, but you see many types of people. It is a kaleidoscopic society that we all get along. To the degree that we do is part of the miracle of the state of Israel. And so everyone's got their identity. Everyone's got their grievances, of course. I have, you know this, I have a bit of an accent on my Hebrew. And, sometimes in American television, I remember growing up in the 60s, if you want to show somebody who was a little bit of, even now when they make fun of Trump's voters on CNN, they'll put on a phony Southern accent. You ever hear that one? All right. But if you want to show somebody who's naive on Israeli television, you give them an American accent.
Interesting.
So I've got my grievance as well. I got it as well. But
yeah. Wow.
It is a miracle. It is a miracle. We do cohere. This place works. And at the end of the day, you can talk about spirit. You can talk about commitment. At the end of the day, what sustains this place is faith. And it's what has sustained the Jewish people for 4,000 years.
Amen.
And that is what I think the people who come on passages, the young American Christians, are part of that story.
Thank you. Thank you. We can't wait to get back to Israel in the right. We're aiming for winter trips. We're going to do everything we can as long as it's possible logistically and safely. We're going to do it. So, Ambassador, thank you so much for being on with us.
Thank you all. Okay. Be safe. God bless you.
Bless you too. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this tremendous opportunity here from Ambassador Michael Oren. As a reminder, next week we'll hear from Dr. Phaedra Shapiro, one of our friends in Israel who frequently speaks on Passages Trip. She's going to be speaking on the subject of leadership and Jewish-Christian relations. She's going to be sharing a really fun opportunity with all of us. So be sure to tune in, and we'll see you next week.
Ambassador.
Ambassador.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.